Very hot in Oklahoma City. This week it has been over 100 every day. And my son sent me a picture yesterday when he was leaving work of the temperature, the ambient temperature outside of his car. And it said it was 120 degrees. Nothing about that is right. I can remember when I was I think I was in high school. There was a day that in Seminole, Oklahoma, it was 118 degrees. And the dealership, they had to move all the cars off the lot because they were sinking into the asphalt. That's a whole new level of hot. And that really has nothing to do with what I'm about to talk about, but I kind of have to sometimes have a runway into the thoughts for today. And the thoughts for today, when I was 16 years old, I've told this story so many times that I'm not even sure. I wish I had like a clicker so I would know how many times I've told this story. But when I was 16 years old, I finished school my sophomore year. When I got out of school in May, I was 5'7", 110 pounds. When I came back at the end of the summer, I was 6'4", 180 pounds, 180, 185. I was a whole new human. Like I had almost doubled my weight. I came back to my very small town, my very small school, 2,600 people in the whole town, 69 people in my graduating class. And there was a pretty good population of my school that thought I was a new kid. I looked so dramatically different that it wasn't even funny. I still have a picture of that driver's license on my phone because people will be like, that couldn't really have happened. I'm like, absolutely happened. But in that summer that I grew 9 inches, there's this thing that happens, and anybody who's grown a lot knows that this happens, is that you lose every bit of coordination that you might have ever had. Because I went from having a size 12 shoe to having a size 16 shoe. That really sums it up. Size 12 to a size 16. And everything hurt. Everything. All my joints hurt. I ended up, because I grew so fast, I ended up at a specialist because they were afraid that there was pressure on my brain stem, on my pituitary gland that was causing growth problems. I had to do all this testing and all this stuff because I had just grown so much and so fast. Now I want to do the math for you for that. Grew 9 inches in 3 months. That averages out to 3/4 of an inch every week. Every week for an entire summer. Like, it's hard for me to believe just hearing that out loud. I grew that much every week for an entire summer. And then I ended up breaking a bone, and they saw that my growth plates were sealing off and that they weren't that worried anymore because, okay, I'm probably done growing. Then I got into college and I grew to my full height of 6'8". So I wasn't done growing, but I guess I was done growing in that part of me. So in that summer, there was a lot of things. There was in all those changes. Some of the changes are real funny. Some of the changes are real silly. But I was clumsy. I was crazy clumsy. I would walk and everything. I was like a baby giraffe. It was ridiculous. And I would trip over things. I would bump into things. I would run into things. I would, like playing basketball, I would step out of bounds all the time. I would step over the line shooting free throws. And it's things that you ought to be able to just know how to do. But I didn't because my body thought it knew itself, but all of a sudden I had a completely different body. Everything changed. And what was once true was no longer true. Not because I was broken, not because there's something wrong with me. Just what was true expired. I think that's the best word for it. But my body still knew what it knew. My body still thought of it as 5'7", 110 pounds. And it still tried to operate from that, but then with all this extra baby giraffe energy. And everything that I knew had been right, and everything that was happening in my world was still right, but I was still working off the old measurements. Does that make sense? The old measurements were based on me at 5'7". They were based on me doing the things that I used to do, and now I have to do them differently. And there's nothing other than time that told my body how to operate differently. So as a result, I had to rethink everything. I had to think about the running joke was I had to learn how to chew gum and walk at the same time. I had to learn really basic, really simple things. And I want to fast forward because with those things that we assume with the assumptions that we have, with the experience that we have, with all those things, sometimes they expire. Last week, I had a moment where there was an assumption that I was making needed to expire. Taylor, who's sitting on the other side of the camera right now, he actually is he's to blame for all of this. It's all his fault. But we're having a conversation because I met somebody that was going to be a potential client, and I'm having a conversation with him. As I'm having a conversation with him, I'm kind of talking through how to work with this and all the things that we do. And whenever I came back and I sit down with my guys, I'll just own it right away. I was dismissive, not of my guys, of that client. I was dismissive of them, and I kind of blew them off. And I kind of blew them off because of an assumption that I made. They're from a market that's fairly close to ours, and people from that area, people that are fairly close by, tend to not value the work. And they don't value because they're close enough to you that it's easy to just kind of take you for granted. So I kind of came in assuming. I came in with this thought in my head of what it is that we need to do, what guardrails we need to have up. And at the end of the day, what I was doing was I was just making it difficult for them for no good reason. And Taylor called me on it. We're sitting in the meeting and he starts asking questions. As he's asking questions, I'm answering, and we're having this discussion back and forth. And it's not really an argument. It's just a discussion trying to figure it out. And he was like, I don't think I agree with that. I don't think I understand why you're doing that. I don't think that's right. And we just had this back and forth conversation. As we're having the back and forth conversation, I fairly quickly realized how wrong I was. And that may sound like not really that big of a deal, because I think that a lot of times whenever we're like the realizations, I think that we're looking for these big, grand realizations. We're looking for these big moments where the clouds part and the sun comes down and we see these tremendously big things. And I think that I'm learning more and more that there are 1,000 small things that move us. Not huge, profound, not life altering. Because the farther along in the journey that we get, the farther along in our lives, I'm 54 years old. At 54, hopefully I have a few things that are figured out. At 54, hopefully I'm a little more aware of my blind spots. At 54, maybe I've also acquired some habits that help me to take feedback. Hopefully. This would be a lot better story if we threw things at each other and had a food fight and then said ugly things and then had to apologize. And we had a moment where we hugged and embraced and we made it all better. There wasn't really that. It was that realization that I was wrong. And it wasn't because of anything that they said. It was because of what I brought into the room. That day, I was reminded of that blind spot. And I was reminded of that blind spot because there are actually people in my world that are close enough to notice. And I think that's a big deal. I think that's a thing that I'm trying to teach myself to be grateful for, because we live in a world now that it is easy to be a free agent. It's easy to be on our own, and it's easy to be accountable to no one. And sometimes it's easy to be accountable to no one, even as a leader, because we think that's what leadership is. But leadership is accountability also. And the thing that I had to do in that moment is admit out loud that Taylor was right. Taylor was right. And when I admitted out loud that Taylor was right, it actually did something to my heart. And it did something to that conversation that's pretty meaningful. Because if I just quietly gone along with him, if I just quietly surrendered to it, then there would be no sign that there was any chance for change. I'd have just gone quiet. But instead of going quiet, I said out loud, I think you're right. Because you know what I want? I want friends around me that will say those things. I want friends around me that will hold me accountable. I want friends around me. I want colleagues. I want people that I'm living enough life with, that they have enough context and proximity to me. Proximity has been this word that feels really meaningful and profound right now. I want a life that has more proximity. I want a life where my sons see more of me and can understand. I want a life where I have more friends that are close to me and can see me and can ask me hard questions. I want more proximity in that. And with proximity, there's risk. Letting somebody close means that there's risk. And in this situation, me being guarded, me having guardrails up, because that's really what that was with that client, had guardrails up. And there was logical reasons for having those guardrails. And here's the thing that I want us to land on for a second. The solution to this problem wasn't about having good reasons. I had good reasons for my opinions. There's no alarm bell on good reasons. There's no alarm bell on things that we've learned from experience. There's no alarm bell on that. But what happens when that expires? What happens when that changes? What happens when we start to use it as punishment instead of help? Because good reasons are exactly where that hides. Nothing, I didn't see any hurt in it. I didn't see any harm. And from the inside, it doesn't feel like judgment. It feels like knowing. And knowing is a good feeling. It feels good to be confidently incorrect. So here's the question that I want to ask. And I've hovered around this for the last couple months. Some different versions of this for the last couple months. And there's the idea that you've probably heard in a lot of places. It's the Walt Whitman quote. It's a thing that we hear pretty regularly. It's that idea of, are we curious or are we judgmental? Those are two fundamentally different things. And the gap between those two is huge. So the version of that right now is, am I willing to listen or am I set in my opinion? Which am I? Because at the end of the day, Taylor was right. And when I said it out loud, the reason I didn't wasn't to teach everybody a lesson. It wasn't to model something. I said it out loud because that's what healthy does. I think that's true. That's what healthy does. And the thing is, that only got caught because Taylor saw it. And I have to ask the question, what would have happened if he hadn't been there? What if he didn't feel like he could say it? What if I assumed that all of my good reasons gave me the right decisions? None of that really holds water. I wish it did. So it makes me wonder, and it's the question that I want to ask. And the thing that I don't usually do this, but I want to take a second and just ask, who is it that's in your world that's close enough to you that can ask questions like that? They can disagree with you because they care. They can disagree with you because good things are important. Doing good things, doing right things are important. But we live in this world where we have a lot of free agents. We have a lot of moments where we default to, you don't get to tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me. You're not my real dad. We say all those silly things, and when I say the exaggerated form of it, I hope you grin as much as I do because it sounds utterly ridiculous. But ask yourself where you're doing that, because I'm asking myself where I'm doing that. And here's the lesson, and I put that in quotes, because the question is, how do you catch this in yourself? You don't. It's incredibly difficult to catch yourself in these kinds of things. It's incredibly difficult to catch yourself making this mistake, which is why we need people around us. A few months ago, I had a on this podcast, I talked about my 16-year-old and the cold front that comes out of the room ahead of him in the morning, and walking through how he checks in with himself and how he learns what's happening in that morning, what's happening inside of himself, so that it doesn't turn into affecting his entire day. And you would think that there's this diagnosis and that we can solve for it, but I don't think this is one that we solve for. I think that this is one that being in proximity with each other, being connected to each other, and having some trust with each other is the solve for it, because it will point out things that we may not ever see for ourselves. And I'll say this, in this season of time and in this moment in the last few weeks, I have felt insecure. I felt anxious. I felt stressed. Everything has kind of been escalating for me in the last few weeks, and I feel a little out of sorts in general. And you know when I'm most likely to make the mistake that I made? When I'm insecure, when I'm anxious, when I'm stressed, when I'm out of sorts. That's when I'm most likely to fall prey, to fall victim to those mistakes. So in those moments where I'm insecure, anxious, stressed, and when I'm insecure, anxious, and stressed, you know what I want? I want everybody to leave me alone. And what I need more than anything else is to not be a free agent. And a lot of this feels really heavy. This is kind of a heavier episode. And it's a heavier episode because in the last few weeks, life's been a little heavier. And I wish I could tell you a funny story and we could all giggle about it. But this is just where I'm at right now. And if I'm being as honest as I say that I am in these moments, then I've got to be okay with the unfinished. I know that when I'm insecure, anxious, and stressed, I'm more likely to move away from everything and everybody. And that's the exact moment that I need to move towards people. I saw all the way back at 16 when my body changed from one thing into a completely different thing. And all those All those truths, all those realities, all those facts expired, and the world was different. How I responded to the world was different. And that's a big snapshot, word picture, an example of what I'm talking about. But in this moment last week, it was a much smaller window and a much more personal window of seeing an assumption expire, a guardrail expire, something expire that didn't benefit me and actually did harm to everyone involved. And I'm going to say a thing that maybe is an overstatement, but I'm going to lean into it. Good decisions don't sustain in a vacuum. I'm capable of being right, but only for a while. Because in being right, I make habits. And in building habits, I make assumptions. And in making assumptions, I build systems that remind me that I'm right. Because good decisions don't sustain in a vacuum. If you want to maintain those good decisions, if you want to maintain all of that, then somehow you have to maintain connection. You have to maintain relationships. You have to maintain closeness with people that care about you more than they care about you being right. They want you to be well. Because there's plenty of moments that I feel like I know better than everybody else in the room, but only for a while. And I may know better than everybody else in the room for a while. But then there ends up being nobody that tells you when a while is up. So I need people. I need people to be close enough to watch me work, people that are close enough to watch me parent, people that are close enough to watch me and see how much coffee I drink. I need people that are close enough to say out loud when I'm wrong, to disagree with me because they care. And I wish this thought was a lot more complete. I wish this thought was something that I could tie up with a bow, but I want to just leave you with this idea and this question of if you have people in your world that care enough about you to ask. It's an incomplete thought, but it's one worth pondering. Thanks for being here this week.